Livestream. I am your host, Benjamin Wheeler, and I'm here with my co host, as always, Anthony Marquetta, and our guest today, Zaklog the Great, with his crowdfund for the mayor of Christ Mountain. How are you doing today, gentlemen?
Uh, Doing okay. Good to be here.
I'm glad to hear that.
My back hurts slightly because of the snow shoveling, but otherwise, fantastic.
Hmm, really? Snow shoveling. Uh, I was under the. No, I'm kidding. Yeah, no, you're it's completely reasonable in most circumstances in winter to be snow shoveling. But we're not here to talk about your problems, Anthony. I don't know what got you that opinion. Uh, no. Today we're
You're
here.
right. I've never done it before.
You always have such a good day, and now I don't know. My compass is gone. Uh, so we're here with Zaklog the Great to talk about his um, crowdfund for Mayor of Christ Mountain. Zaklog the Great has been in our circles for quite some time, and I've shown up on his show a few times, but I think this is the first time you're showing up on mine, sir.
That is correct. I have not been here before. In fact, I have been outside of my own channel. I have been on other people's channel once, which was on Social Galactic Radio. So,
Ah, very nice. Social Galactic, excellent stuff, excellent work there. Uh, anyway, to focus a bit more, let's talk about the Mayor of Christ Mountain and what it's about and what you're trying to fund for.
is my so is the camera visible or no?
No.
Okay. The Mayor of Christ Mountain is a book I wrote last year. Actually, most of it was written on my iPhone on downtime at my job. Um, while there was nothing else going on, I was like writing chapters, which I actually got a surprising amount done. Um, but the Mayor of Christ Mountain is it's based on the real life murder of Canon Hinnant. I don't know if that name is enough for you guys, or if I
Absolutely
um,
not. You'll have to tell us all about it.
Yes.
not a problem. Um, okay, so okay, 2020. Oh geez, I didn't know it was that recent. For some reason, I thought it was farther back than that. Kenan Hinnant was a 5-year-old boy in North Carolina who was out riding a white boy out riding his bicycle, and a black neighbor shot him dead.
Mm.
Uh, on Wikipedia, the motive is still listed as unknown. Um, and to be honest, I don't know that much more about the case. But there's a number of other cases you could slot in there. But I basically took that case as kind of the starting point for this, and and I said, okay, let's say this happened, and the courts for some reason let the guy go. Um, and and okay, and I'm like, but then what would happen then? And it's like, and the basically the father decides, okay, I've got to handle this myself. Um, and so that's kind of what the where the story starts. Um, and I like I said, I wrote this mostly. Actually, wait, we're in 25. I wrote this
Yeah.
mostly in 2023. So not last year, but the year before. I'm still getting used to anyway. But and so I wrote it and I posted it on after I got a good ways in where I was confident that I was keeping pace. I started posting it serially, posting chapters every week on a blog,
Mm-hmm.
and and then after I did get it finished, this is the first novel I've written, novella short, but after I did get it finished because I wasn't sure I was going to, I also was I worked with Codex of Veg Folk Fables. I believe you're familiar with her.
Yes.
Uh, and she did the cover art for me, and I did a small print run of a print edition. Um, and so then not long ago, I started working on a I started working with another artist from Social Galactic. Lolo from his website is lolosart.com, and he's doing a few internal illustrations
Mm.
for it. We have one of those already, um, and I'm doing a crowdfund basically to see how many pictures internal illustrations we can get for this, and that's what I have going on right now. Um, and so, for one thing, if you're interested, currently there's the initial illustration that I paid him for, and currently we have money to have three more done. And if you would like to help me go further, I have this running until the end of February, and basically I consider it open ended. As much money as people want to put into this, every $100 we'll get another new picture. Um, and Phew. And so yeah, and it's on Fund My Comic, um, because working with people who aren't liable to kick you off for wrongthink is pretty important, especially you know when your book is on a topic like this.
Absolutely. I do remember quite a few of these sort of things happening during the summer of Floyd, we'll say. And it was always racially motivated in a very bad way, and it was almost always directed at children, which was always disheartening to see. We don't know why they did it. Mm,
Well, and the other thing, and I only learned about this I think last summer. Um, Vincent James on the Red Elephants was the first person I heard talk about this. There is actually a division of, I think it's in the Department of Justice. It's called the Community Relations Service. I don't know what else they do, but one thing that I know they do, in fact, do is whenever a white person is murdered by a non-white for whatever reason or non-reason, um, they go and meet with the family and basically manage the public response. And
ah,
so when you hear these things like Molly Tippett's dad, Molly Tippett's uh, I don't know any of the years, but I know what happened.
yeah.
Was murdered by an illegal alien, several years ago, and her dad, talked about this in a press conference. He's like, I don't hold this against them, and basically, they're like Iowans with better food or something like that.
Yes.
Um, which is horrible, but at the same time, they these this department, these people from Department of Justice, um, probably met with him, and
Yes.
I don't know what promises or threats are involved there. It doesn't make it right, but it is a thing. And so
Yes.
like if I'd known about that when I was writing this, I might have included something like that,
Well,
and then Don Pence respond.
there's always
But
time for a sequel.
well, yeah. So yeah, that's the story, and that's the genesis of the story, um, and that's how I got to this point. Um, did you have questions about the? Did you have any questions about the story or?
Yeah, so it's just kind of like this is your time to talk about it and sort of like what the interest is, because even though we do have, how do I want to talk about it? it's one of those things where there's no denial of reality on our channel. Our channel is dedicated to the truth and proper association of all things. It's one of those things that's unfortunate to hear. That Molly Tibbetts' dad was forced into, saying something, or perhaps they found him very pliable. Who knows? Those records are assuredly not available for consumption. Um, and but from the outside, before I knew of anything like this, which I didn't until you mentioned it, and that's not faking or anything like that. It's like I just thought it was like literally just cucked people, incredibly cucked. They'd rather choose the burrito over their own daughter. Um, it's difficult to
I mean,
be concerned about it, I guess we'll say, when you hear stuff like that.
there still is some degree of moral failure there.
Mm,
Um, but like I said, we don't know from the outside. We don't know what was promised him, what was threatened him. If he didn't, go along with their preferred script. But
mm-hmm.
still going along with it, like even silence would have been better than that. Just like, no, we're not talking.
Yep.
Um, but what was yeah, like part of the reason I started this story was like I think of movies. I don't know if there's. I'm sure there are more recent ones, but like movies like what's the guy's name? Oh crud, Charles. Oh crud, Charles Bronson.
Oh yes.
Um,
Death Wish.
what's the movie?
Death
Death
Wish.
Wish. Yeah, there's movies like Death Wish, um, where there's this something happens to the guy's family and he goes on this murder revenge, and I'm like these why don't we see these kind of things? Like there's another one I would like to do. There's another book I would like to do, um, that would that is a at least that is significantly more difficult than the one I did. Um, but when I was first thinking that idea, I thought of like what's been happening in various towns in England,
Mm,
with the Muslim rape gangs,
yes.
and I'm like, why isn't there? I know why there's not a movie, because the movies industry is run by people who don't think quite that way.
Right,
Um,
right.
but like, why do I not know of a book at least going through that? And I kind of would like to do that book, but that book would be a lot more difficult because to make that at all realistic, basically it would be a small town, and um, instead of one person doing this himself, it would be like they'd have to organize and they'd have to work together, and I'd have to think about like all the different elements they would have to cover
Mm,
to handle things, which is a lot of things. If you don't want to make it just basically goofy, because they would have to, because in order for things to get that bad in those towns in England, basically the entire establishment is at the very least looking the other way, if not actively helping them.
right,
Um,
right.
and so they would, and so in that story they would have to fight. I yeah, I was the one I was thinking of. They would be transplanted to America because I don't know anything. I don't well, not anything. I don't know enough about England to do that well. But it would be in America, and they would not be just fighting the criminal gangs. They would also have to deal with the our some to some degree with our federal government, and
Yes.
also they would have to find a way to silence any press that's going to talk about how horrible these people are who decided to do these things to these innocent, harmless immigrants. Um,
Mm,
and so that's a significantly more difficult book than the one I did. and maybe I will get that one. But
Well, it sounds familiar to some of the stuff the very aggressively Cascadian people tend to write. Um, we'll say.
if that book exists, let me know.
Yeah, we'll
I would
talk.
be if you.
Don't you worry, we'll talk. There's stuff I can give you, and only you
Um,
specifically. But it's a difficult genre, partially because it's about taking power from the government, and the government doesn't usually like that. There's
well,
yeah,
in terms of story beats, I actually did come up with a way for them to get the federal government off of their back, mostly. But in terms of like plot points. But anyway, I don't need to
sure.
necessarily go into that right now.
Yeah, it's it's interesting stuff. Partially because it's closer to an American tradition than people like to think. Um,
Well, I mean that was until sometime like at least mid late 19th century. That was basically how they handled it in the West. Like it's just
mm,
a bunch of people. Oh, someone's causing trouble. A bunch of people get together and say, okay, I guess we're going to handle this. And
yes,
maybe I should look into studying that a little more in terms of developing that story.
yes. It's as writers, it's difficult because there's always a problem of going into what our fantasy is about this stuff. In reality, it's not really about our fantasy. Um, going through it's about saying something that's true. And if we sort of choose the lie to satisfy ourselves, it ruins the story and the ability to speak. What England's experiencing with their government crackdowns, is fundamentally different than anything we'd experience, not because of some sort of government competence or incompetence, but just how our government reacts to such things. For one, there's only so much the police will take before even they start grumbling about who they have to stamp down on. Um, and it causes like Americans are more likely to choose power for themselves over some others, and it's difficult for the European to really understand that. Like I've talked to some people over there. I have relatives over there. My mother's English. It's a completely different mindset that is not American. In the end, this far on, what would be for us a rousing tale of vengeance is to them distasteful. They treated the riots that they had over the rape gang issue as being very distasteful. Um, and it's like those people who were arrested after that Muslim who was radicalized by the Taliban or Al Qaeda or whatever it was, provably so, and reported in the official documents. Um, it's like, well, they were writing, well, it's not, we don't know, it's Muslims, and it's like, yeah, it was Muslim. Dude was a second generation. He's had Al Qaeda information that he was reading their books and stuff like that. He attacked it in a manner that is usually described as terroristic. I don't know what you want, Mr. Two Tier here, but you're still very unpopular, and you're basically just banking that the people will be fickle, and they usually are, sadly.
So one thing, one person so far. I mean, I actually don't know how many people have read my story online. Um, I could look at the tracking on the site, but I don't. For one thing, like dividing up the number of views by the number of people, or by the number of chapters. I'm not sure how many, but I've only had one person comment so far that they knew what the title was. without me saying, um, because the mayor of Christ Mountain, I actually patterned this book a little bit after it's. Do you know any Spanish or French at all?
Yes, a little French.
What would Christ Mountain be in French?
I don't know the word for mountain.
Okay, but it's I patterned it after the Count of Monte Cristo a little
Ah,
bit,
very nice.
because not only does this happen to him and his entire life comes apart, but like after this happens to him and his life comes apart, he um, he discovers a hidden treasure which he uses to finance his revenge. And in this case, the hidden treasure is a hard drive with Bitcoin that he'd bought. The guy is a programmer, and he bought Bitcoin like back in like 2009 or 2010, and then he had lost track of it. Like it hadn't done much for a while, and so he kind of forgot that he had it. And so while he was
Right.
cleaning out some old stuff, he found this hard drive, and he looked on it. He's like, "Oh, there's some Bitcoin on here. How much?
Oh.
Wait, I am rich." And then also, wait, I'm I'm rich, and nobody knows.
Yep.
Um, and so yes, it also I also uh,
It's very
there's also
modernized.
I was proud of coming up with that. I thought that was a good way to because like I mean almost any other thing where you're gonna do like hidden treasure today in a modern setting sounds at least a little hokey. And so yeah, I thought that was a good way to introduce that element into the story. Um, and there's also two scenes or two main scenes dealing with the modern plague that is HR ladies.
Yes.
Um, because the yes, the main character ends up getting fired for racial insensitivity, and although she's not at the top of his list, she is on his list for dealing with later as well. So um, it's it's kind of odd, and I don't know if you've experienced this. When I was writing the story, one one of my favorite scene like this one of the scenes I enjoyed writing most was actually the scene where he got fired, and I don't know why. It
Freedom,
it was
perhaps.
just well it I think it might be that it's kind of fun to write. It's kind of fun in some ways to write a very malicious person, but also where nothing actually horrible is happening. Like I mean, it's not good, getting fired from your stable job, but like it's not, for instance, like you know you're a small child being murdered, and so like I do think it's kind of fun. That might be it, like just writing a horrible character.
I'm
I don't know.
sure riding Steer Pike was fun for Mervyn Peak in Gormenghast. He's the villain. Sorry.
No, it's yeah. I'm trying to. I've heard. I just remember hearing that name not long at all ago. And I don't remember where I heard that. I haven't read that. However, I know that much.
Yes. It's the first book is worth reading, and maybe the first half of the second. Uh, he, yeah, yeah. It's you'll know when to stop on the second one because it's a bunch of professors trying to get horny for a very ugly woman, um, which is like true to life. I can totally see it. However, I am not entertained. And I guess So having evil characters that are very entertaining is a pleasure all its own, especially since it's very true to life. Numerous stories are coming out about HR's, various wickednesses, which we men of the West always knew. Um However, you know, some people are just surprised that the Human Resources Department is evil. Who would have known? Hmm. These types of stories usually devolve into violence against uh, targeted types. Whoever they like the least gets targeted. What sort of thing are you going for there with that? Are you going for it,
Okay, so
or are you just going to
let's see.
enjoy the time? I guess.
Oh gosh. Well, I'm trying to think of how much to say without creating spoilers. I mean, okay. There's uh, so like I said, this was patterned off of a real life murder, um, and the main character Edmond Dantent, his son Gunnar is murdered by a neighbor of theirs who's a black man, and so he like I said, the courts let the guy walk, and he ends up deciding he's got to handle it himself. And so obviously, um, the actual murderer is you know part of the plan. Getting the actual murderer is part of the plan, but also hold he also does hold a few other people responsible. And so um, yes, there are a few other people on Edmund's list, um, and there's the the body count does not go into double digits, but
Okay.
there's also a point where someone actually, now that I think about it, there's 2 points where someone figures out where an innocent third party finds out what he's up to, um, and he has to try to figure out how to handle that. Um, he's like, I don't want to kill someone who's not part of this. I might have to. Is that what I'm going to do?
Mm.
Which is interesting. And then also, you know, he's just, you know, yeah. At one point, he's not over the course of this story. He's not a Christian, although it's not said, but I think he does become not long after. But at one point, he's praying, and he says, like, God, I don't know, what you think of me right now, of what I've done and what I'm about to do, and I don't know if I'm your good books or bad. I just know somebody had to do something.
Mm.
Um, and a friend of mine who was one of my early readers called that the anti-hero's prayer, and I'm like, yeah, that kind of works.
What do you think about that, Anthony? If you're here.
So, a lot of the times when we have these guests on, as Ben knows, it's either an Anthony guest or a Ben guest. You are very much a Ben guest. So I have been listening with much interest to what's been going on, but I did not know about any of this in advance. Hence my silence. I know
Don't
Well,
about
worry. Don't worry, Anthony. I don't do your required reading either.
yeah. That, that's not fair, though. I'm going to defend myself for a moment. This is what Ben told me. Oh, by the way, we're having Zaklog on. I said, oh, I know Zaklog. Watched his channel a few times. A good guy. Uh, did not know that we were discussing a book that he wrote, and Ben did not tell me. So, uh, my comment this so all of this is say I have been listening, but like I'm not going to interject to be like, yes, very interesting, with nothing to add, right? I will say though, I think that let me try and ask a more genre related question then, since I really don't know about this book at all, right? Is Are you envisioning this in the vein of like, I don't know, my thought for like these sorts of revenge type movies is like, man, I can't even think of any off the top of my head. I don't really watch them much because I was going to say like Taken, but Taken isn't a revenge movie per se.
Well, I mean,
It's
it
a
kind
rescue
of.
movie.
Yeah, but I mean, he's not just there to rescue her. He likes. He's glad that he's getting to like mess up these people. Although then they did like two sequels, and I'm like, dude, this keeps happening. I think something's wrong with you if this keeps happening to your family.
Well, yeah.
Well, it's like Death Wish. Like things keep happening to the daughter, so he has to go and kill a bunch of people.
So I guess that's my question. Are you viewing this in terms of like a thriller style story?
um, like what is the huh? I don't I don't know where to put it. Like I said, this is the first novel length that I've written, and what kind of a genre? It's I don't feel like it's thriller or because it's not. All I can say is it's a revenge story. I don't know. It's I mean, there's not like a lot of like big action scenes. Um,
I see.
there's there's him doing these things, but like most of the time he plans things out in advance and is able to pull pull through get through this without actual actual physical conflict. So it's yeah, like I said, it's a revenge story. I don't know, it's not an action. I guess you could call it an adventure, adventure, revenge. Um, but like, yeah, I don't have a particular, um, a good, genre classification for this. Um, did I answer your question or no?
I mean, you certainly gave more data, so that's it's helpful. Uh,
There's okay, well, okay, I will say there's, let's see, there's up to like, let's see, 140, there's 42. So like the first probably quarter of the book is mostly this guy's life just being ripped apart. Because it's not just his son dying. Um, his like when okay when the verdict is read and they say not guilty and he's in the courtroom. Um, uh, he's without really meaning to, he stands up without even knowing he's doing it. Kind of, he stands up and shouts, "You can't do this! That N killed my son." Um, and then because of that reaction, and because of and that has a great deal of fallout, and basically a lot of other like most of his life is kind of starts coming apart for a while. Um, and so like the first part of the book is this guy's life being destroyed, and then the rest of the book is a him planning and executing his revenge, and b him trying to put some kind of life back together, if that makes sense.
okay, yes, that gives a clear idea of what to expect when I pick it up. So let me try and ask another question that's related to the title of the channel. We're the Superversive live stream, right? How familiar are you overall with like the superversive fiction movement?
um I know I know that I know of few authors who've worked with it, and I know the idea. that it's the opposite of subversive, instead of like coming in and like undermining the culture with kind of toxic messages. The idea is to like come in from the side, from an unexpected angle, and inject positive messages that are going to uh, improve, that are going to move the culture towards God. If that
Yeah,
am I reading it right?
I would say so, yes. It's very much like when you're trying to figure out if something's superversive. I've always viewed it as like more of an art than a science, and I think that there's also certain distinctions, like El Jaji Lamplighter, who was one of the leading figures in like the early years of Superversive. She would make a distinction between something that was superversive versus nominal. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. Noumenal.
Numinal.
Nominal Superversive. And the way that she would describe that is that they like one of the comparisons she gave, or that like I gave because I asked her about this and she confirmed that this was a good idea. It's like True Grit, the original, the book, True Grit. Yes, was a Coen Brothers movie and a John Wayne movie and a novel. So novel first and then adapted into a couple of movies. One of my favorite stories. Uh, So she would define True Grit as superversive, but then something like the Chronicles of Narnia as noumenal superversive. True Grit has like an almost Old Testament morality to it. And it's always been an interest of mine in figuring out like what does superversive mean, and it can't just mean something I think is good, right? Because then it's a useless word. Which is a very difficult. It's a surprisingly hard trap to fall into, or I should say, an easy trap to fall into, right? Where like, well, I like this book. I think it's worth reading. Doesn't that by definition make it superversive? Well, no. Otherwise, it just means things that I like, which isn't very helpful.
Well, I will say there was this was something I was thinking about partly because of this book, but I had thought about it before. Um, I made this grid because of it, like a vertical line and a horizontal line, and on the top there was talking about like kinds of art, and on the top there's morally good, and on the bottom there's morally bad, and then on the right side there's artistically well done, and on the left side there's artistically badly done. And you can have something in any of those four quadrants. You can have an artistically well done movie that is, or artistically well done book that has a morally bad message.
Yeah,
Um,
and that's one of the hardest things too, right? Like, especially when you're discussing it with people. It's one of my least favorite like conversations to have. I'm not going to say who. I'm sure you could probably take your own guesses, but I don't. Yeah, whether you guess right or not is irrelevant because it doesn't matter who I'm talking about. But I've had this discussion about like in specifically the new Miles Morales Spider-Man movies. I have said like these movies are subversive. They are subversive. They're subversive. Like 100%. You can point to elements of them. The whole message of the movie is subversive. And the argument is like they're excellently done movies. They're imaginative, smartly written, very well made. And this is 100% true. I completely agree with this. Like, I cannot argue with that. They are very clever, very smartly written movies. Really well done pieces of the superhero genre, and they're subversive. Like, both of these things are true. The entire point of the films is that Miles Morales is replacing Peter Parker as Spider-Man. That's the whole idea behind it. And the entire second movie is about how anybody who thinks that Miles Morales doesn't belong as Spider-Man is wrong. That he has, in fact, he is really Spider-Man. If you don't think he's Spider-Man, you're essentially in the place of the villains, right? The ones who say you don't really belong as Spider-Man. Well, he's not Spider-Man. Peter Parker's Spider-Man. Miles Morales is at best a different character with similar powers, but we need to act like he's Spider-Man. And I've talked to people who love these movies. They're like, they were wondrous and oh, they have good messages in them, which is true. You know, and pretty much most kids' movies are going to have a vaguely acceptable message, right? Of like, yeah, the evil people are bad. Uh, And I
Woo!
guess that's correct, right? But the central theme of the movies is about replacement of our culture, right? It's an attempt to replace the culture. And that's one example, and it's an example I bring up because it's a relatively recent one. There are others, of course, many others, and it's always a very difficult conversation for me. Uh, Now, with your story, the reason I bring all of this up is that I am trying to work out if I would consider your story superversive, because certainly it is not subversive, right? But is that enough? It might be. I mean, maybe it
Well,
is.
I also have to say this is something that bothered me a good bit because like while I was writing this, like I don't actually know, is this a morally good story or morally bad? I mean, it is about a guy, like the main character is a guy who is killing several people, um, and it's also very strange to me because like I don't know whether this is morally good or morally bad, but I do know I believe in this story, which is a troubling position to find myself in. I'm like,
Yeah. Oh, I
am
totally
I?
understand. I
Um,
totally understand what you're saying because Ben and I, in our Pinkerton's ghostwriting, we have had this discussion many times where how to like thread this needle because I have a big problem with like, if you kill me, you're just as bad as me. Like, no, that's obviously nonsensical, right? It's
Yes.
incredibly common, but it's clearly wrong, right? It doesn't make any sense. This is why with Batman, everybody comes up with various different creative ways for why Batman needs to do it. In reality, it's all ex post facto justification. When the reality was, I didn't want to show killing people in a children's comic, right? But then when
Mm-hmm.
comics got darker, he had been established as not killing people, and now you need to make up different reasons, which is whatever. I don't really care. I mean, I like some Batman media and not others. It doesn't bother me particularly that Batman doesn't kill, but to act like there's some sort of grand justification, well, no, he killed in the early days pre-code, right? And then they stopped him from killing because there was some censorship. And then like the comics got dark again, but he'd already been established as not killing. So now you need to come up with a reason why. And it becomes this grand moral thing when it's not a grand moral thing. It's nonsense. Right? Like, so we discussed this with Pinkerton's Ghost as we write like revenge stories and things, and going, okay, so at what point is what the character doing justified, and at what point is it unhealthy, right? And it's a very difficult line to kind of find.
Mm-hmm.
well, and I actually have in this story at one point. Give me a second. Where is that? I think that should be it. Um, I had to find a way to work this into it. But he finds a copy of a C.S. Lewis a book of C.S. Lewis essays. Um, and he's just flipping through them, and he finds this one, um, which is you could I think you can probably even look this up online if you want to. It's "Delinquents in the Snow," is the story, is the essay rather, and it's basically about in the specific case he's talking about, it's a relatively minor thing, but basically the law is letting criminals go unpunished, and this is going to keep getting worse, and how much are people going to put up with? And then C.S. Lewis quotes someone, says, let's see, where is it? Lewis talks about how a man might deal with his father's murder and why he does not simply kill him himself and leaves justice to the state. And what if the state does not do justice? Lewis then quoted someone else who reasoned, quote, "I am amongst barbarians who refuse to do justice. I am therefore in a state of nature. I will stab the murderer of my father." And he reads that, and he's like, and he just like, "I am amongst barbarians who refuse to do justice." And that's part of what pushes him to take the action he does. And it's you know theoretically we live in a society that has a justice system, and at the same time, you should, you know, ideally, we just want to let that go. We just want to let the justice system work. But you know, even in ideal circumstances, like it's gonna fail sometimes. You know, sometimes an innocent person is going to get convicted, and sometimes a guilty person is going to go free. Um, and what do we do with that? Are you? What's the guy's name? Are you familiar with the name Gary Plouch? I'm not sure how you say that.
Doesn't ring a bell.
No, sorry.
Um, okay. Um, this was what year was this? Give me a second. Okay, so this was in 1984. So this was definitely before I would know about this myself. But his son had been this man's son had been I think I know molested. I think possibly abducted and sexually molested. And the guy
Oh, yes, I
was
remember him. It now. Yes, keep going.
yeah. And so the guy had been arrested, and I think it was in an airport that this happened.
Yes.
And he was coming back for trial. And I think this was actually on this was on TV. And uh, Plouch waited in the airport, and he had a gun, and like when the guy was walking by, he just came up behind him and shot him in the head. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't, and it's like the guy was arrested, he was going to trial, like you should have, okay, so it was abducted, but abducted and sexually molested, but like the guy was arrested, he was going to trial, um, you know, at some level you should have let that carry through. That's probably the right thing to do. Um, at the same time, like yeah, at the same time though, like if I were on the jury where this guy was where Plouch was being tried, like all I can think is like I'm not gonna vote to convict him. That's like that is
Mm-hmm.
in terms of like a practical moral response. I'm like I am not going to vote to convict this guy. And so it's and it's like, and if you want to go to the Bible, God says, vengeance is mine, I will repay. Um, at the same time, also, and I just found this recently, um, although I had read that part a while ago, although I hadn't heard this explained. In like Old Testament Israel, um, if someone was if someone was deliberately murdered, um, then basically the system, such as it was that a male relative of the victim would go would kill the murderer.
Mm-hmm.
And then but also in the Old Testament it set up what they called cities of refuge, where the person who killed them could flee, and the Avenger of Blood, who was the person who was after him, could not come in there, and they would try and find out, okay, did you like was this intentional or was it an accident? And if they decided it was accidental, he had refuge there until for a set period.
Yes.
Um, and so like you know if you take the setup of Old Testament Israel as a moral endorsement, then like that was pretty much the plan. Oh, you killed one of my family. Well, I guess I'm going to handle this. Uh, and so yeah,
Yes.
I like I said, I this was something that bothered me to some degree while I was writing it, and still does a little bit. I don't know whether I wrote a morally good story or a morally bad story. I hope I wrote a well done story. at least.
Yeah, I'm very sympathetic to everything that you're saying because you're absolutely right. Like the the specific concrete questions I think is really like what do you do in the actual moment of action, right? Like what is the right or wrong thing to do when you actually need to act is a much different question than how should society run or what should be done in the abstract, right? Like it's
Mm.
all very good to say that you need to let the justice system run until the justice system fails you. And then you're faced with these people in your neighborhood and they might be dangerous to other people. Or you have a situation where maybe that's not the case, but somebody, you have a grieving father who shoots some sort of obvious stain on society. Now we do have some, I don't have any specific examples of like memorized, but I know that there are times this happened in real life where judges and juries have gone very lenient on the killers, right? Where it's like, there's been, oh, this guy like raped and murdered my daughter or son or both or something. So the father goes in and shoots him, and then he gets tried and he ends up getting like, time served or something, right? Like, because he's arrested immediately after. That will happen occasionally. And it's the difference between like the abstract and the concrete, I think, right? The platonic ideal of how these situations should be handled versus how they're actually, how you can expect people to act in the moment, right? What it's reasonable to expect people to do in the moment, right? Or when faced with these situations in real life, like can you really reasonably expect someone to not go after these people when the justice system fails them? Is that fair? Probably not, right?
Mm. Yes.
Well, and it's also why like why the law is so complex because like in every single case there's like a set of general principles that like apply across the board, but then in every single case there's this detail that pushes it this way, and there's this other detail that pushes it a different direction, and it becomes like taking the specifics of a um a particular case and trying to work with that in the principles of a larger of a body of established law is a really it can be a really complex thing. And again, this is it can be a really complex thing even if you're working with um even if everybody is acting in good faith. um and then you add into the system people large numbers of people who are not acting in good faith, and it gets very bad very quickly. um
Yeah, I grasp what you're saying. Another thing too is like when you're discussing the morality of these things, one thing, I mentioned that we're doing like similar types of storylines and things in Pinkerton's Ghost, and specifically one thing that I'm focusing on right now with my character is that he's going after the people who murdered his ex-wife. And I'm trying to portray it as a sort of slow descent into as he becomes a darker and darker character and then needs to be kind of pulled back, but I'm trying to be very cognizant of avoiding the obvious pitfalls that always plague these sorts of stories, which is, well, aren't you on his side the whole time because he's going after murderers, right? And the answer is yes, you are. That's why I'm trying to really delve into, right? Like, first, I think it's into the specific motivations of what you're doing. And some of it, we also need to remember that as Christians, where you go, it's understandable, but not the higher calling, right? So, for example, why are you doing it? Are you doing it because you want them to suffer? Well, one thing, the wicked to suffer is good in a certain, right, understood in a certain correct context. But are you doing it? Are you causing extra suffering? Are you, right? Like, are you acting beyond what you're meant to do, right? Or what you have a right to do? And then you go, well, you can't really expect someone to do differently. That's true, not reasonably. Maybe any normal person, but on the flip side, we are called to a higher thing. Like Jesus says, if you're angry you've murdered someone in your heart, right? Uh, so there's clearly layers here that get really complex. And the way that I'm trying to get around it is by, I have the ability to write in first person and to write detailed narratives, right? And you get to see the thought processes behind the characters. So you get an idea of their mental state, right? And as their mental state devolves, and then eventually you go into like what they're willing to do to get revenge turns into something that's no longer morally defensible. That each stage is more and more, it starts off as very morally defensible, and then slowly as time goes on they do more and more. You strip away the layers, right, of what is morally permissible here. Like, it might be morally permissible to just kill these guys, but what if you're putting other people at risk? What if these guys are only tangentially involved? Or what level of involvement is enough to say I have the right to be your executor, right? And various questions like that. So yeah, I find this question though really interesting. So I don't know, this is going to be possibly very out of left field, but do you know the anime Trigun?
I I've heard of it, but I haven't watched anything. No.
Sure, that's fair. uh I can't expect everyone to watch every niche anime. uh would
Trigun
be unfair,
isn't
but Trigun's,
niche.
it's niche enough.
It is
Anyway,
no such thing.
I'm. We'll discuss. We'll argue about this later.
Fine.
Now, it's one of my it's one of my favorite shows, though. One of the things about Trigun that's so fascinating is that Trigun was created by a Catholic. Now, Yasuhiro Naito, the creator, it comes out later. He's kind of a squishy Catholic. He describes himself as like sort of a Buddhist Catholic. He also doesn't talk about it very much. It's not like his. It's not like he's some sort of I don't know. It's not like he goes. It's a big part of his like public persona, mostly because in Japan, mangaka and manga creators tend not to have very big public personas, with rare exceptions. So Yasuhiro Naito, though, like, he was Catholic, and Trigun has a very Catholic sensibility to it. It's once you know this and you pay attention to it, you can read between the lines. It's very interesting. Uh, one of the reasons I love Trigun so much is that the main character, who's called Vash the Stampede, because it's an anime, so it's got to be awesome and epic and cool. Uh, Vash the Stampede will not kill people. And there is a character named Wolfwood who becomes his friend, who is a priest who carries around a huge ass cross that turns into a wicked looking gun, and he shoots bad people with it. It's great. Uh, it's very anime, but Wolfwood doesn't like Vash because Vash is saying, "Hey, you shouldn't kill people," and Wolfwood's going, "Yeah, that's easy for you to say. You're basically a superhuman, right? I'm just a guy, you know. Like, I'm trying to protect, like, literally these orphans in their orphanage, right? And I'm their only protector. So yeah, I'm gonna shoot them with my giant cross gun. And you can use your like superpowers to avoid bloodshed while I act like a regular human and kill the bad people." And this tension between these two sides is addressed head on, which I think is fantastic. And the solution that Trigun ultimately ends up coming to, what you might call like the synthesis between these two views, is one of motivation. In the end, like, why are you doing it, right? Because it presents Vash as flawed in his motivation behind avoiding this bloodshed. That ultimately it's because he doesn't want to get blood on his hands. It would make him feel like he's a sinner. And he literally uses that word, which shows you the sort of show, right? He doesn't want to be a sinner, so he's going to avoid this bloodshed. Meanwhile, though, it's leading to these bad people doing terrible things. That's not to say, though, that he's wrong for trying to avoid bloodshed, but why are you doing it? So that's I think about that a lot. I think it's a very interesting way of like resolving this sort of tension, and it's a tension that I think is very interesting. So in your story, you mentioned that like the second half of the book is like full of the aftermath of what your main character does.
Yeah, the first section is like the murder, his life coming apart, and then the second part is him progressively. Like I said, I don't want to go too much into detail, but
Sure.
there are a few people on his list, and it's him working through the list, and also, um, like I said, there's another part of it which uh, became much more interesting as I was working on it. That's basically him kind of getting a life back together, where like basically once he's done, like there's still something left of him, um because like basically I don't think I thought I planned out that way deliberately, or I thought it through deliberately that way, but basically like with with what had happened to him, um the crime itself, and then like everything piled on top of it, it would have been very easy for him to get to the end of this, and then basically just cut himself off from society, because like seriously, I hate all of you. Like what good is what good is what a good are the rest of you? And I didn't that didn't seem like I wanted him to have a happy ending. um and so like that was not a happy ending, and so like
Hmm.
finding a way for him to be something, have a future as something else than the person who had done this, if that makes sense. um
Yeah, that definitely makes sense because I'm asking because I'm trying to, and I know you're trying to avoid spoilers, so I need to be careful, obvious, and you need to be careful about what you give up and what you say. But like, how much does do your characters grapple with the problems that we're talking about? Of like, how much is he affected by this argument of am I doing or not doing the right thing?
um it's for himself. There's kind of like I said, he has that prayer where he's like, look, God, I don't know what you think of me right now, I don't know where I stand. um but there's also, I think the other main way that kind of comes out in the book, is there, um partway through he meets another character who is a Christian, and who like periodically is like, it's not like it's not like a big thing, but like is trying to get him to go to church, and he's like, look, I and he doesn't want to. Well, in fact, he anyway, and partly, I guess maybe I should have been more explicit about this, but basically for him, partly it's like, um there's in the Old Testament, there's, what do you call it, King David, and he unites Israel, and he is this wonderful king, but like he's not supposed to be the one who builds the temple, because he's a man of blood, and his son is fine. He's a and so his son is the one who builds the temple, and that's kind of the thing with him, like why he doesn't go to church, why he doesn't want to follow that. It's because like, I've got to do this, and I can't. It's not. I don't feel right. Maybe after I can find a way through, but it's not something he's not wrestling with his conscience most of the book. Um, so yeah, again, I don't know whether I should have included more of that. Whether that's something I should go back and uh, and do some revisions for. But
Well, not necessarily. If you know, it's your book and your style of book. What you were saying about the Man of Blood? This is not to bring everything, not to be that guy who brings everything back to pop culture, but makes me think of Godzilla -1, which is an awesome movie, by the way. But there is a scene in it where they're going to go. They're at the end of the movie, and they've come up with this plan to go after Godzilla, and this young kid wants to join them, and because he was just too young to have gone to war, right? So he's probably like 18 in the movie or close to that, right? He was just too young to have been in the war, and he's a little disappointed at having missed it, right? Missed out on it, but now he's ready to, he's going to go and fight Godzilla, and they tell him like, no, you're not coming, right? And he's upset about this, and he goes, wait a minute. He goes, but I missed out on the war. And there's a great moment where they turn around as they're walking away, the three of the older generation, and they grab him by the shoulders and they go, not fighting a war is something to be proud of. And then they leave him there and walk off. Uh, it's a great scene. It speaks to this fascinating concept of like, there is something honorable about war, specifically honorable, and that's specific to war, right? In that, like, if you're willing to fight, it's that willingness to fight and to die for the things that you care about, right? There's an honor there, but there's also an honor to being the person who is not willing to go to that level, right? The Lord is a god. The Lord is also called the Prince of Peace. He's also going to bring about revelation, right? Like, both of these things are a part of God and the Godhead, and you can't really separate them in a neat way, right? Where you go, one is better than the other. I'm having a hard time articulating this concept, but uh hopefully what I'm saying makes some sense.
Well, it's also something. Uh, I in in moral conversations, I end up pulling up C.S. Lewis a lot because I've read a fair bit of him. But he
Mm.
says there's you know an actual complete morality is not just one thing. It's not just one command. Um, it's a whole there's a whole set of different duties and different actions for different points, and it's a complete morality is taking the action appropriate you know to where you are now, and sometimes, um, in most cases, killing another person is not going to be the right action. But at some points, that might actually be the right thing to do. Um, if you are, if you are in a reasonably, you know, under a reasonably just government, and you are the executioner, you are executing people you know who have violated the code of your country, who have somehow significantly harmed other people. Killing another person is what you're supposed to do, and deciding that you don't want to in that case would be wrong. um, and so yeah, it's the other thing, which actually kind of also goes along with my book. um, and I don't know where I he also said, like, if there is such a thing as a just war, then logically there is also such thing as an unjust peace. Um, and that's not something most of us like thinking about these days. We're in America, at least, we're very inclined toward the Church of Nice. But that's not the real world. That's not all there is.
It gets Yeah, it gets very tricky, right? One of the interesting things I read, Aquinas's document De Regno on kingship, right? Very, very interesting document. Aquinas basically spells out his opinions on government, uh, and why, in his opinion, monarchy is the best form of government. So now he gives it. Aquinas is very practical, right? Like, he considers monarchy the best form of government for purely practical reasons. It just like, it is just the best way to run a country. Uh, I'm trying to think of the word, like not on a philosophical level, but simply because the other ways of running a country will run into more problems than monarchy tends to. But
Pragmatic.
one of the more, what was that?
Pragmatic, was that the word you were?
Yeah, yes, that's the word. So the most interesting part to me of De Regno is he discusses what to do when being ruled by a tyrant, uh and the recourse you have. And this doesn't just mean like a singular tyrant. It really was just him talking about like what to do if you're ruled under a tyrannical government, right? So it could be a democracy, which in fact he thinks is much more inclined to go towards tyranny. He thinks it's practically inevitable that democracy is going to go to tyranny. But uh anyway, he discusses the recourse you have for if you're under an unjust government, right? You're under a tyrannical government and what you can do. But what fascinated me is that Aquinas considered it a live possibility that you were just in a position when you had no recourse. And he says if you're in a position where like rebellion is going to make things worse, where leaving is not a possibility, right? Where like there's nothing you could do to support away, then pray to God and repent. He goes, you're probably in this position because your country is in a very low moral place. So you need to repent and you need to pray to God because God can get you out of this, but only God. Right. And he goes, otherwise, there's nothing else you could do. And he considers this a live possibility. Like, you could genuinely be in a position where rebellion is not an option, where, resistance is not an option, because all of these options just make it worse. Right. So the only thing left for you is repent and call others to repentance and pray to God to save you because he's the only one. Uh, I find that very interesting because I often get into these discussions with people where they go like, "You're in this situation," and you go like, "Well, what can you do?" Right? Like, what are we supposed? Are we just supposed to do nothing? And the answer is like, "Well, no. What you're supposed to do is repent." Right? Like that's what you're supposed to do and call others to repentance. But if you mean why don't we organize the militias and storm Washington D.C.? Well, because that's going to be a disaster. Things can always get worse, which is another point that Aquinas makes in De Regno. Uh, he's very, very clear. In fact, he's very clear about this. Like like believe me, it can get worse. Just because things are bad doesn't mean that the right thing to do is to start a revolution, right, and overthrow the government. I think about that a lot, right, and I feel like what you're talking about, where we're in this Church of Nice, part of it might be that we're stuck in this situation where we don't really have any good recourse besides call people to repentance, right? Where you go like, what's your plan here? Are you going to organize people and overthrow and invade Washington D.C.? I always talk about this when people go like, this is a very like I go, this is a very serious question when people go like, oh, the people won't take it. I go, oh, so you're gonna join the militias that are gonna fight back? And then they go, well, no, of course not. Like, right, like I'm not gonna pretend I'm any different. I'm certainly not going to. You all know what I would do if Joe Biden, right, in all of his infinite wisdom and glory, gathered together the armies and went door to door and said, by the way, I'm president from now on, and he knocked on my door and all of the police, were on his side, I would go, got it. Because there would be nothing else because I'm not going to fight him. I'm going, I have a family, right? Like, I have people who are depending upon me. I might do some form of resistance in my town, but if the answer is I need to start some sort of, fighting rebellion, do you want to be the one who's in the line of fire? It's going to take a lot.
Yeah, and it's so one thing I was thinking about with that, you're talking about like calling people to repentance, and that that being your only course. And one thing I remember seeing, there's someone who was um talking about like certain people who are corrupting and destructive influences on our society. Um, and he says, like, you know, they aren't real. Like, there what there is your own weakness.
Hmm.
And he if you don't buy what they're selling, they can't they don't have power. And there is some truth to that, and there's some things that are not true. Like, you personally can opt out, and you will be stronger and better for that. But at the same time,
Oh yes.
if it's the rest of if you are the exception and the rule is that corruption has harmed people, like, the harm that does to your society is not something you can just opt yourself out of. And so, sorry. And the other and the other thing, kind of like with that, and this is also something we don't, the Church of Nice is not terribly comfortable with. um if you read the Bible, and more so in the Old Testament, although again, if you're a Christian, it's the same it's the same Bible, it's the same God. um God does not just deal with individuals. God does not just deal with individuals, um, in terms of sin and and righteousness and judgment. God also deals with nations, with entire
Hmm.
peoples. And if you personally aren't a part of the problem, but you are in a society that is wicked, that's going to cost you something. And God's punishment may come down on is going to come down on your society, and it's probably going to cost you something. um and God said, when Abraham was bargaining with God, he got God down to, like, 10 people. If there are 10 people, 10 righteous people in Sodom, will you let the city survive? And God said yes. We found out there weren't 10 people. um I there's not this is not necessarily the way the story goes. I did think it was a kind of funny interpretation. You could theorize that there were in fact 10 people, 10 righteous people, and then God got Lot's family out, and now there were only 9.
I think
I've
Which
I
always
is,
think
interpreted the story as there was only Lot and his family, so God in his mercy spared them, but them
hmm
only.
and
um,
quite frankly, you know, it's one of those things where Lot may have been righteous, but I don't really think much of his family's righteousness.
God was being
yeah.
nice.
Yes.
uh,
But yeah, you're absolutely right. There's a judgment on the nation, but I don't know. Like, Diregno was fascinating to me reading it, and reading that section of it was so fascinating to me because it opened, like, it was such an eye opener to the answer to the question of, like, that's asked so often by reactionaries and non-reactionaries alike, right? Which is, well, what can we do? And Aquinas is like, maybe nothing, right? Like, you might just be stuck. You know, you might just be stuck. Repent. That's what you do.
Yes.
And it's also it was one of those things where, like, I remember having this conversation with other people and, like, kind of half arguing with them, but most half agreeing with them, where I'd be like, let's say, after the election, you go, oh, the 2020 election was stolen. I have no idea if you think this or not. It doesn't really matter, but let's assume for a second, right? The 2020 election was stolen, right? Let's say that Joe Biden came out, Trump is thrown into prison, then Joe Biden announces on national TV, yep, it was stolen, all right. What are you going to do about it? Well, what are you going to do about it? Like, you know, are you, again, like, that's where I asked the question, are you going to storm the Capitol?
It's like,
Like, I'm not
no.
going to do it.
well, and the other part of that is, and I don't know, I don't know where we, like, most people aren't going most people aren't going to start something like that. But like if you get the right kind of leader, you know, they can that kind of person can create something much bigger than themselves very very quickly.
Oh
And
yes,
so
I imagine that's why this wasn't done, right? Because you're worried, like, well, what if somebody does rise up and rallies people? Do you want to deal with that? Probably not.
yeah, and so it's there's the question of like what's right to do, and there's also like I guess all three of us would say like I'm not that leader kind of person. I'm not the kind of person who's going to like put bring this movement, bring some major political or even revolutionary movement. It's just not the way I'm built, and people wouldn't follow me. Um, People wouldn't follow me. It's not. I'm not that kind of person. But like if that kind of person does show up, then that can change things very quickly, uh, for the better or quite possibly for the worse. Uh, and so along with the call to repentance, along with call to repentance, you might also ask God, hey, can you send us someone to lead us out of this?
Mm.
Um, and that seems like a valid prayer also. Um, I Okay, I actually have to. I don't have anything right now, but I do. I should get going before too long. I have obligations around here. So, is there? I don't know. Are there any last thoughts or last questions?
One second. Star Storyteller says, I think a lot of cathartic heroes fit into Superversive because right now we need people to be dealt with. Yes, he was abducted. I read the child's book. It was a really good one about his father. Not sure. He was targeted because his mother signal. I think talking about
He was talking
Plouch.
about Plausch.
Yes, SA happened. Sexual abuse happened at the class the perpetrator taught afterwards. Yeah, that sounds about right. Um, but I guess it's one of those things. You've answered our questions as well as we can expect. It's a very
Hmm.
important topic here because these things do crop up. In the 80s and 90s, you had a bunch of crazies, with like a radio program and a strong distaste for honest taxes, in the stupid sense, I guess, and a whole bunch of other things. And then, as we're moving into our own times, what we're seeing is there's a complete break between popular culture and what we can produce. Now, if Joe Biden came up and said, what you gonna do about it? Well, the answer is that there's hundreds of lawyers and there's entire elite things that have just found their new grift, elite wannabes and actual elites. Like while for ourselves, the three here, it is likely that we have no power to do anything ever, at least not without breaking laws and going rogue. Uh, Frankly, it's one of those things where I don't really have the taste for it, and I don't know about Anthony or Zaklog, but it's we're not here to death wish anything or anyone. Do you hear that, Robert Langdon, my FBI agent, who's certainly listening in on this? If your name's Robert Langdon, it probably is. I'm just taking a shot in the dark, listening to the muse, repeating what I'm being told to say. Perhaps. Uh, no, I like your work, Zaklog. It's one of those things where you are a friend, and friends get promoted, provided they're creating things with that spark that we're looking for. In the end, justice must be done. And unfortunately, it is very likely, in many regards, that justice is only being done through gritted teeth. However, It is being done. And perhaps we'll enjoy 4 years of justice, maybe. Uh,
So
Perhaps.
Perhaps.
so yeah, one more time. This is not. I am working on getting this up as an ebook on Amazon,
Mm-hmm.
which is currently in limbo with them. So
Classic.
hopefully that will be available. It will be available there soon. Um, and then right now, the main thing you can read the entire story on the blog. That is
Uh-huh.
at zaklog.wordpress.com. The
Yeah.
whole story is up there. Um, and what's going on right
I'm afraid, Mr. Zaklog, we've lost your
now? Like
connection.
I said, I have the crowdfund to on GoFund my not GoFund.
It's fundmycomic.com. I'm afraid, no, we can't hear
Your
you.
connection
Fund
is
my
going on.
Wait, let me. Hello, is that better?
Yeah, can you hear us, sir?
Much better.
Okay, all right. But yes, the current thing is fund my comic. I'm raising money to get some internal illustrations for the story, and then once those are done, I'm going to do another print edition myself, which I'm planning on I shipping out a few of those myself, and then I'm probably going to have it on Amazon's paperbacks on demand.
Hmm.
Is the eventual plan. So that's where we are now, and that is hopefully the not too distant future. So yeah, if this story sounds interesting to you, for one thing, right now you can go and read the entire thing um, at zaklog.wordpress.com. If you like what you see there, you can help me get some more illustrations done um, on Fund My Comic, and hopefully you will soon be able to buy it as an ebook, and not long after that, I will have another print run done with the illustrations included.
Excellent. And, yeah, very nice. Uh, Thank you very much for being on here, Zaklog. I've been on your show a couple times. I appreciate that. Do check out his YouTube channel, which is under Zaklog, that name there. I want to thank everyone for listening in. Uh, I am just crashing. I'm started a diet for New Year's, and my enemies will be happy to know there's already about 15 pounds less of me. We'll continue with that and talk to everyone later.
All right, thanks for having me tonight.
Mm.